Welcome to the show, Professor, and welcome, Andrew. I got to start with you, Andrew. What are you hearing, and what do you think should happen in this moment?
I'm mostly hearing abject horror, and I think that there should be strong pressure on President Biden to step down. I think that you're right in terms of the difficulty of compelling him to do so. I think that the idea that there's just some sort of executive committee that you can snap your fingers on and everybody lights up their cigar and goes, well, let's just paradrop Gavin Newsom in. That doesn't exist. That's not there. So the only way this is going to happen is if Joe Biden is convinced to step down, and
Well,
or
let
at
me
least
ask
that's
you
the
this,
primary way.
Andrew. Andrew, don't you think that's political suicide for the party? There is no consensus about who should be the quote unquote replacement for Joe Biden. We're headed into a convention literally next month, August 19th. Our Dem convention starts. I'm a delegate from California for the convention. So we would have total chaos at that convention trying to pick a leader of our party, trying to pick someone, not to mention all the issues with campaign finance laws, about all that money that's been raised for the Biden Harris campaign. It doesn't just translate where you can just transfer that money over to whoever this new candidate is. They've got to pick a vice president. I mean, it's a complicated mess.
Very much so.
And if you pick someone, you know who Gavin Newsom is. I know who Gavin Newsom is. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I've asked some of my friends and families, they don't have a clue about him. So who has time to become a household name if you are parachuted in, as you said, into the top spot for the Dems?
So to clarify, I do not think this is good for the Democratic Party either way, nor do I think that there is a positive, everybody's happy path forward. What I think happened was it was a spectacularly bad debate on account of Biden. Biden didn't look good. There was already a lot of framework going into it as a kind of referendum on his virility and fitness as president. And within that framework, I think he did very poorly. And the downriver effects of that are twofold. One, it's a lot harder for the Democrats to now make the argument that Donald Trump is an existential threat when the frontrunner they put up is an 82-year-old man whose abilities are in doubt. It would seem to lower the actual threat level by doing so. And then the other bit is just there, I think, are a fair amount of people that are independent or in the middle who are going to be swayed by that. And I'm worried that this is going to be a hobble that Biden can't get over. That the footage of him stumbling is going to be used again and again and again. And so from where I'm at, I think it's better for the Democrats to recover by having a crazy, chaotic brokered convention and moving forward from there.
Yeah, I just disagree with you, Andrew. Look, we had to get over voters for the Republicans, got over Donald Trump calling, making statements about grabbing women by the pee. They got over the fact that he has 91 criminal counts, felony convictions filed against him, 34. He's actually been found guilty in a Manhattan court. So, I mean, the list goes on and on of things that the Republican Party has decided is okay to support this man at the top of their ticket. But yet somehow now the Democrats, because Joe Biden stumbled in one debate that has an administration, second in command, Kamala Harris, the most competent, I would argue, administration yet in this country, or at least one of the top administrations, that somehow we've got to kick Joe Biden to the curb for his fumble, but yet we can stand with a man that, according to his own former communications director, lied every 100 seconds on that debate stage. So we just kind of normalize the fact that the man who would be the president of the free world literally couldn't get clearance to be in the White House as a convicted felon. He couldn't get a job at a bank. He couldn't get, half the jobs in this country with his felony record. I think we finally have gotten Professor LaCroix. She was having a little technical difficulties. Let me get you into this conversation, Professor. Thank you for joining us. This whole notion that we can just trade out, have a brokered convention, what do you say about that? How complicated is it? And what would that outcome likely be if the 4,000 delegates, I'm one of them, decided not to vote for Joe Biden as the candidate?
Well, it would certainly be very complicated, the likes of which we haven't seen in modern American politics in quite a while. Although I will note, sitting here in Chicago, I think when you talk about the Democratic Convention in Chicago, people think 1968. But there was 1860, and that was the one that ended with the nomination of the Republican convention of Abraham Lincoln, and that was a surprise. They went through a number of ballots, so different Republican Party, obviously, then. But it's not unprecedented. We tend to have a very short historical memory in the United States, especially in politics and law, but that's not that long ago. But yes, I think realistically today, that would be extraordinarily complicated. But then again, we've seen surprising things happen.
Let's talk about campaign finance laws. I've read something that suggested that Biden and Harris could not just simply transfer the billions of dollars that they've raised, fundraised for their campaign over to some new candidate, that it's not that simple. Is that accurate? I don't know if that was an accurate statement. You got to be so careful. Everything you read in the news today, most of it is not true and accurate. So I'm asking you as someone who hopefully knows the answer to that.
Well, my sense is, it depends, very lawyerly answer. But what I mean by that is I suspect that if a donor had given money to, say, a campaign or to the Democratic Party or to some other entity that is not specific to the person and the individual candidates, that seems like it could roll over. I'll caveat that with election law is not, campaign finance law is not my specialty. And also, if you still have Vice President Harris on the ticket, certainly that's an individual person who would be a recipient of those funds, perhaps in either case. So I don't think that those funds are generally given to a personal person, but it would, of course, depend on the terms of the donation.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, Robert. You may be able to find some legal scholar that's opined on that, but I remember reading very distinctly that there would be some huge issues with the transfer of the funds, again, that would cripple any candidate, obviously not in a position to raise the kind of money you would need to run for president in the short period of time that would be left. We'll come back to that. We have to figure out what the accurate response to that is. Andrew, this Supreme Court today ruled that Donald Trump has some broad immunities. One of the concerns about Donald Trump winning the election is this notion that the two oldest and most conservative justices, Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, would be given their walking papers, would be asked to retire, go off, make millions of dollars on the speaking circuit, and that there would be the appointment of two young and even more ultra-conservative justices that would push this court even further to the right. Do you have any concerns about that?
I am one of the few people in the country that likes the Supreme Court in general, and I say that in the sense that I have a low opinion of a number of members of Congress, but I think everybody on the court, whether I like them or disagree with them, is very intelligent. And I think that the extreme nature of the court is overstated. You have a law degree, so I defer to you on this, Areva, but it seems to me that the conflict that constantly plays out in the court is the balance between the originalists on the one hand and the living constitutionalists on the other, which is an interpretive model of jurisprudence rather than just pushing Republican policy or pushing Democratic policy. And the evidence that I would submit to that is that recently the court was overviewing milafistrone. I'm making it sound Italian here, but the abortifacient drug that was up for it. And I believe Kavanaugh was the one that wrote the majority opinion that said, no, this is legal. So I don't think that the conservative court is just picking a conservative goal and working its way there. And I think that the court session this time around had a
wait a minute, Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew, let me stop you there. Donald Trump says to the contrary. He said he purposely handpicked these justices so that they could overturn Roe v. Wade and usher in a new conservative era on the court. Those were his words, not mine. And I want to get Professor LaCroix in here because she is a former member of the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court and an expert on the Supreme Court, maybe not campaign finance law, but what do you make of Andrew's statement, Professor, that somehow the courts, that we overplay this conservative versus liberal bent on the court?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different ways one could think about what conservative is. And I think we tend to think in politics, we tend to think of it as partisan and Republican versus Democrat, for instance. But on the court, I think it's more complicated. And so, as Andrew said, we have the originalists, sometimes the textualists. Those are distinct. One is kind of, do we look at what the founders either themselves meant or what it would have meant to their audience? textualists, we can read the text and we understand what 18th century people meant when they wrote because we can recognize it. And then others who do other things, which are who are sometimes grouped under living constitutionalism. Now, it's often the case that originalism and textualism skew conservative in how they're applied. But I'll also note that sort of even if one takes, like, for instance, the Trump sort of judicial appointment strategy at face value, the conservative Supreme Court, the sort of marching papers that President Trump gave to his staff when he was in office, even if we say they're trying to do conservatism and originalism as a piece of that, one thing I would note is that in a lot of these big cases we're seeing right now, they're very selective in when and how they do their originalism. So even for many of them, their sort of standard method is applied pretty haphazardly, which is interesting because often the conservative claim about originalism is that it helps constrain judges. But I think we see, I mean, the immunity case today is a great example. There's sort of a few examples that, in quotes, picked out of the Federalist essays from 1788, 89, but basically ignoring the sort of historical practice in the early American Republic, which was not always and not often because it didn't come up that much, but to treat the president as not above the law. And so there's a selectiveness about how they use history that is also, I think, something we should hold them to account for.
Yeah, and some would argue, Professor, that selective amnesia, let's call it that, is a way of promoting, supporting, advancing some of the conservative ideologies. Again, it was Donald Trump who touted appointing a conservative justice to do what he said the conservatives have wanted them to do forever with respect to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Andrew, we don't have a crystal ball. Nobody knows what's going to happen at the convention. We did get an answer, I think, to the question about the money, though. There was a statement made by the Biden campaign manager, Julie Chavez, that whatever happens with Joe Biden, you are right, Professor, Kamala Harris controls $91.2 million as of May 31st. So if they want to get rid of Biden and they want that 91 million, it looks like Kamala Harris better be in the mix. And I doubt if Kamala Harris would be in the mix to be somebody else's vice president. So all these folks that want to replace Biden, they better ask themselves, are they really going to get behind an African-American woman to be the president? When she ran for president, we know she wasn't successful, Andrew, in their primary, and we know her ratings have been really, really low over the last couple of years, although she enjoys tremendous support in the African-American community and other communities. But what do you think of that? Kamala Harris got the bag.
I think that makes more sense. So I'm going to quit pretending to be a lawyer for a moment. I'm going to go into my default mode as a comedian with you, where I think I have better insight here. It seems to me right now, the choice that America has between Trump and Biden is an old guy who is getting lost and driving his car through the mall, and an old guy who's driving his car through the mall for fun on purpose. So neither of these are great outcomes for me. And while I'd probably go with a guy getting lost and accidentally driving his car through the farmer's market instead of swerving to hit squirrels, I'd probably do that. I would feel a lot more comfortable with somebody that is just not driving through the mall at all, including Kamala Harris.
I'm glad to hear that. And again, like I said, I've been talking about this over the last couple of days with folks and polling people on this whole question of Kamala Harris, because like I said, if there were a poll to be done before that debate about whether you wanted Kamala Harris to be president, I don't think she would have fared very well. But now, obviously, with the driving or dragging the car through the farmer's market analogy, maybe Kamala Harris is looking a whole lot better, Andrew, to folks now. And particularly if she got $91 million in the bag that comes with her, she's probably looking damn good to folks. Andrew, predictions. What happens in this debate? If you had a crystal ball, what do you predict happens?
Following this debate, in terms of just going forward?
Going into the convention, going into Chicago, is it a brokered convention? Or are delegates going to just vote the party line and Biden's going to be the candidate?
I think it's going to be a brokered convention. I think that it was dismal enough last week that there are conversations happening right now. When I watched media coverage, I was live streaming it. When I watched media coverage, the people that were very much in the Biden camp, did not look to me like they were shrugging it off. And I think that people that are in the party position of actually running the party can't come out and say this was a disaster, but I think it was. And I think there's a lot of pressure on him. I mean, I would say smart play right now would be for Biden to potentially resign, if only to give Kamala Harris the incumbent advantage where she goes in as the president. So I think a lot of weird things are going to happen over the next few months, and a brokered convention is the most likely outcome.
Thank you so much. Again, this is Andrew Heaton. He's a stand-up comic. He does political satire. He's host of the Political Orphanage podcast. You can find that every place podcasts are found. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your insights today. When we come forward, Professor LaCroix is going to stay with me because we're going to talk about some of these blockbuster cases that have been issued by the Supreme Court just in the last week. A lot of surprising decisions by this court.